This podcast may contain disturbing content for some listeners. It's intended for mature audiences. Listener discretion is advised. This is True Crime XS.
You did something completely different here. I was going to go with it's Thanksgiving, like in the U.S.
Yeah, I thought maybe that you forgot we did a true crime podcast.
Well, a massacre counts as a crime, right?
Well, it does, but we can talk about that just a little bit if you want. I just want to point out something that actually you go first.
Well, so this is where this goes. Earlier in the year, I ended up doing a lot of research into different indigenous peoples around the United States, the people who were here when English explorers and Spanish explorers got here. And I had been reading different stories. So I had pulled this one aside when I was doing that because I was doing something completely different. That was my writing world. But I had pulled this story aside and I was like, I wonder if anybody remembers or knows the story of the 1637 Pequot Massacre, because I don't think people know it.
Did you certainly know not what it. Well, yeah, I mean, I've been exposed to it mostly on the History Channel. It's not the version of Thanksgiving we learn, really.
Right?
While I have no doubt that the history of Thanksgiving and what's portrayed as Thanksgiving in the public schools of the United States versus what is accounted to have happened. It's controversial, right? There's a lot of, my basic understanding of it is controversy in that we're taught that Thanksgiving was a time that, our ancestors, the Pilgrims, not that those are one and the same, but they sat down with Indians to have a feast because they had survived.
Yeah, that's pretty much the imagery we're sold.
And then, so there's so many things that aren't necessarily true about that scenario, like settlers stealing the land from Indians, and then the wars that went on between the settlers and the Indians. And so all of that is kind of wrapped up in this Thanksgiving controversy that you hear about off and on. And as sort of a society here, because of what we learn history-wise, and because we have the Pilgrim and the Indian play in first grade or whatever in our public school curriculum in the United States, it's hard to kind of fathom, the 1637 massacre version, right, of Thanksgiving,
right?
And I just want to, it's not that I didn't want to talk about this because it's fascinating to me, but just like every other holiday that we celebrate, I think a lot of the associations with Thanksgiving that are known, are assumed, all the things associated with it, just keep in mind, it's an invented holiday.
Oh, absolutely. And there's a lot of BS on both sides of whether you believe this older set of stories or you believe the holiday set of stories. There's a lot of invented and fabricated stuff.
Right. But as far as the point in I feel like the spirit of the Thanksgiving that we celebrate today is to give thanks for our families and to come together, and it's a huge time for the retail economy, Black Friday. happens the day after well, it used to happen the day after Thanksgiving. I'm pretty sure it starts.
Now it just runs all of November.
It's just always Black Friday. We have all these traditions. And so I don't want to, I don't want there to be controversy over Thanksgiving. And I feel like it's not that these historical events didn't occur, because they're events in history. I feel like it's almost like a spoil sport attitude to intertwine it with our Thanksgiving holiday. And that goes all the way back to the fact that in early America, they had these Thanksgiving type feast every time they massacred a group of Indians.
Right. I get it. No, I understood that when you started posting the other massacres, I was like, oh, okay, well, I can see where she stands on this. I have interesting sort of evolving conversations, because my kids at the age where when they hear about something like that, it's interesting because now the internet sort of ruins everything for you. You can basically go on the internet and figure something out. Whereas before, we lived for years not really understanding what was happening.
And I like knowing much better.
I think I do too. But my kid, is in that regard is smarter than me at this age, in their teenage years.
Yeah, I can understand that. I can also see where, and not your kid in particular, but any child or anybody really, I can see where this holiday could get crapped on, basically.
Yeah.
And I don't think that should happen, because I feel like we have enough crap already.
Well, I have really fond memories of my Thanksgivings growing up and being with my family and the food and just seeing cousins, siblings, all the people that are around during that time. Oh, it's not quite the same now. I think it kind of would be if the pandemic were not as heavy as it is, but it's pretty low key considering the pandemic. But all of these people that we're going to talk about did not have as much fun with their families as we did.
No, right. But I do think, so you can take it for, what it's worth, but I think everybody should have what Thanksgiving means to them. And I do think all of the historical events that people talk about, that, lead up to Thanksgiving, they're all relevant in that it's history, and we should never forget history. But just don't make Thanksgiving into this terrible thing that it's not.
Yeah, no, I realized that's what you were doing, because I recalled talking to you about Thanksgiving before, and I realized it's kind of a weird thing to do a holiday about. So it's one thing to talk about true crime on Halloween and true crime on Valentine's and true crime at Christmas. It's a little bit different to try and set something up to sort of tee off on Thanksgiving. And because most of our episodes drop on Thursdays and Fridays, it's one of those things that I was like, you know what, we could do a Thanksgiving episode,
and I'm totally ready for it.
Yeah, I noticed. So, all right.
No, I mean, we can do the historical Thanksgiving. It's fine. I mean, I was like, oh, I'm just going to add some stuff.
No, I don't so I think I'll say this. If you look at Thanksgiving and the basis of Thanksgiving originally sort of happening around the Green Corn Festival celebrations, you can find a lot about the history of the U.S. and some of the worst things that we did in the early version of the United States.
Well, I didn't do them.
No, I mean the people that lived in the United States did. I'm using royal we, which is probably a terrible idea related to massacres. Our ancestors.
Yeah,
I don't know what the hell was going on, but it was terrible.
There was a lot of miscommunication, and the miscommunication continues today.
Yeah, and I feel like if I go too far with this, what I'll end up doing is making people because I get into this mode where I'm like, you know what? We shouldn't just be grateful for one time a year. We should be grateful all year. We should be great because people do the whole November, I'm grateful for. And that's awesome. I'm glad that people are acknowledging it. I'm grateful for a lot of things in my life. I'm like, we've been talking about this last week. I like my life. I like everything that goes on in it. And I think it would be weird for me to pick out particular aspects and leave out other aspects to say I'm grateful for this. Because the truth is, I feel pretty grateful to everything in my world all year round.
I do too. I've actually been in other countries on Thanksgiving, and other countries don't celebrate Thanksgiving like we do. And I don't know, it could just be me, but like that wasn't always readily apparent to me. Just kind of being close to home, you don't think about the fact that like not everybody has this Thanksgiving where everybody gets together and they eat this huge meal, right? And because a lot of countries don't do that. And so while it does have like a symbolism in history, it's also something that eventually, and I believe it was right after the Great Depression, it was, signed into law that Thanksgiving would be a national holiday, and that it would be, it would always be the fourth Thursday, but never the fifth Thursday.
Yeah, it's really weird rules.
But the reason for that was because if it falls on because technically Christmas season starts after Thanksgiving. Well, it used to anyway. And so it was a strategic move for the economy because they needed the full month between, because it was the last Thursday of November until after it became a national holiday, it fell on a fifth Thursday somehow, which is weird, right?
It's really
possible to have a fifth Thursday?
Yeah, it is possible.
So, because I always thought, this is confusing. I thought it was the third Thursday of November, but apparently not. And so it's the fourth Thursday, and the reason it's the fourth Thursday is so that there's a full month of Christmas shopping, and it's specifically geared towards our economy because they found when they did it on the last Thursday and it was, the fifth Thursday of November, well, that pushes it closer to Christmas. And so there's not that full month there, right?
Yeah, it changes the fiscal years in numbers.
Yeah. And so, and then, that gets into why we have, Black Friday, Small Business Saturday, Cyber Monday. It's all a racket, but we need a good economy. We need an economy that's working. And so, Thanksgiving was actually like signed into law as a national holiday to be held where, it can boost sales for our economy and the retail economy. And it's been that way since, like I said, I believe it was right around the Great Depression is when that happened.
That's when it got, you mean as far as being formalized that way?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it was formalized. Roosevelt did that. And so he looked at 1939 and 1941. So in 1942, Thanksgiving by act of Congress received a permanent observation date being the fourth Thursday in November. And it was no longer at the discretion of the president, which that had happened previously because if you go back through and look at how Thanksgiving was originally set up, it sort of depended on how they felt about the history of Thanksgiving. Some presidents chose not to celebrate it and others did. And they took it away from the president. They had some issues during the Civil War where they couldn't have holidays. And clearly there's a war going on. But because it was tied to a federal holiday as of 1885, meaning Congress recognized Thanksgiving as one of the few federal holidays, meaning it was paid for federal workers, there was some control that was given back to the president. And then from 1942 onwards, by an act of Congress, which was signed into law by Roosevelt, it became permanently the fourth Thursday in November. And there's a lot more to read about it related to like the history of Thanksgiving. You could go on, and I'm sure if you probably have to like be specific in looking for it on Wikipedia, because I'm sure Thanksgiving gets viewed more as an international holiday and gives the different dates and times. But if you go down for the Thanksgiving in the United States, where, you know, the bulk of our listeners are in the United States, so that's what we're referencing here is Thanksgiving in the United States. You can go on, you can read about the sort of controversial part of it, but you can read about the history of it. It is a very, very fascinating read. And I had thrown out us covering like the massacres and that are part of the controversy and what was true and false, because I was like, oh, it would be cool to cover a Thanksgiving episode. And you like triple down on that. I don't understand. You like, no, let me show you something even more interesting.
Well, okay, so I said that, so I read all the articles and I'm ready to talk about them, but you said you were looking for some more stuff to cover.
Well, okay, so I was looking, okay, when I said that, I was looking at really old stuff, going through really, like I was like in the Smithsonian archives, looking at things that had happened. No, yours is way more interesting in terms of having a true crime podcast. Mine was, I couldn't figure out how to, like clearly some of this stuff is sort of crime related. I would like to cover it. Other people have done that better, particularly from the perspective of both American Indians and indigenous peoples, which includes Canadians and other folks. And I asked this weekend, I was like, what do you guys like? What is the preference for how I address Indians? And they said American Indians is our preference. We don't like the word Native American. We don't mind Indian. We don't mind indigenous peoples. We would actually prefer if you'd address us by our tribal names if you speak about tribes specifically. That's why I said the Pequot at the beginning, because I was just naming the specific tribes. But in trying to dig for information from back then, here's what is making me lean on your material more. The older material, whether it's a scandal or not, depending on how you look at it, it's all been whitewashed. It's all been written from the point of view of these English and various other European settlers who came over. So you're getting their perspective, but there's not a lot of written record for the other side of it. And I don't like to cover things that are so slanted. So when you threw out other Thanksgiving crimes, I was like, you know what? There is a Thanksgiving episode.
Well, sure. And yeah, I mean, I like Thanksgiving. It's always been a big deal for my family. And we've had some really cool things happen with Thanksgiving, and I get the controversy, and I just feel like it's sort of like the Grinch at Christmas. I mean, it's like a spoil sport attitude and that's not to disrespect what happened, right?
Oh, it's
not to say
I can't make hide nor hair out of what really happened. I know it was terrible on the native people.
There was a lot of fighting happening but every single thing was miscommunication. Every single thing. Well,
here's the other thing that happened though. The Thanksgiving feast that we're talking about, if we go back and look through even the settlers' writings, they're happening like every 6 weeks. They're not the festival of celebration and holiday that you and I are talking about right now. They're happening all the time as a way for them to absolve themselves of the reality of the situation.
I thought they were just thankful a lot.
You could call it that if you want, but I like the crimes that you came up with where it's individuals for the most part, and it just happens to coincide with Thanksgiving. And I'll tell you what, I'm going to do them in chronological order, which I know is sometimes a thing for you, because the first one is crazy, but it's also pretty short. Had you ever heard of her before, by the way?
I didn't do it in chronological order. I don't know who it is.
So you can't read the dates in your links. Okay. This says, just go to the one that says 1991.
I got it.
So the first one, I don't know how to say her name. She's Egyptian. It's Amama Ari Nelson. Omema.
Hold on. I'll see if I can get.
I'm going to let the dogs in for 1 second. Oh, thanks. That was helpful.
Omema Ari Nelson.
Okay, so it's Omema.
Yeah, Omema Ari Nelson.
Omami?
Omami Ari Nelson.
So she is an Egyptian-born model and nanny who was convicted of murdering her husband, Bill. This is disturbing. So she was born and raised in Egypt, and she immigrated to the United States in 1986. She met her husband, William Bill Nelson, who was a 56-year-old pilot, in October of 1991 when she was 23 years old. Within days of meeting, the couple got married, but she would later claim that during the couple's month-long union, she suffered sexual abuse by her husband. She claimed that on the 28th of November, 1991, which is how we get into this case, is because it's a Thanksgiving case. Bill had sexually assaulted her in their Costa Mesa, California apartment. Following this, she stabs Bill with scissors. She beat him to death with a clothes iron. And after killing him, she began to dismember his body. She cooked his head, she boiled his hands to remove his fingerprints, and then mixed up his body parts with leftover turkey and ran it through the garbage disposal. Neighbors claim they heard the garbage disposal unit running for hours after the time of Bill's death, and supposedly she castrated him in revenge for his alleged sexual assaults. She told her psychiatrist that she had cooked her husband's ribs in barbecue sauce and eaten them, but later she denied this. What the hell? I mean,
I think that might have been a miscommunication.
I mean, whatever is going on here is absolutely bonkers.
Right. So we've got a 23-year-old who basically she met Bill Nelson in October of 1991, and they were married immediately. So I wondered if it was like how did they meet? Was it some sort of setup? Like, it just seems like she might have been looking to get into a relationship where she could be taken care of, right? A 56-year-old pilot and a 23-year-old immigrant.
Yeah, I mean, that's definitely, in my opinion, that's what was happening here.
I think so too. And then she kills him, and she went through a whole lot of trouble to just be arrested 4 days later?
Yeah, she gets arrested on December 2nd, 1991. Originally, she's arrested on a suspicion of murder charge. And a year later, December 1st, 1992, the trial begins. During the trial, she has pretty good defense attorneys. They put on a defense that she had undergone female genital mutilation, which is a very serious thing. And it was pretty unknown at the time. In 1992, it was not as mainstream a concept as it is today. The idea was that the sex was traumatic and painful for her, and that this was increased by the assaults that she allegedly sustained during her marriage. The problem I had with what little bit I could read about the trials is they acted like this has been a marriage going on for years and this had been happening, and she had sort of it was almost like they were trying to put on a battered spouse defense. But if you looked at the timeline of the time the two of them had spent together, so
they hadn't even been together long enough for her to.
Well, it wasn't just that. It was that's part of it. Part of it is like it's a very short marriage. Like it's less than a month.
They could have still gotten an annulment.
Right. They still could have gotten an annulment at the time. The problem was they hadn't even spent that much time together. They had only met on about 6 occasions. When you basically think of it like you spent 6 dates with somebody, you're married in there, but you're still kind of moving in and getting together, went to great lengths during the trial to call it their apartment and their assets and all of these things. But the truth was, if you meet somebody in October that you're married to in November who dies in November, you haven't had a lot of time together to mingle and mix things and even get to know them.
Well, and I'm going to sort of contradict myself here for a second, because it's the fact that she stabbed him with scissors and that she hit him beat him with, I guess the iron was hot. I don't know, but that seems especially painful. But it also seems like those are weapons of opportunity, right? Like, so maybe she was fighting back. But then when she dismembers him and boils his head and his hands and then puts him in a garbage disposal, that's where it kind of loses me. And if you'll recall, we spoke about another case recently where I was pretty sure the guy had snapped, and it ended up, it's kind of gone out of the news now, but I'm pretty sure he dismembered her body. I'm talking about Joseph and Emily Ferlazzo.
Yeah, I remember this case.
Okay, so he had shot her to death and dismembered her body.
Right.
And it was in their short converted bus. And so that's what I mean when I say I'm going to contradict myself, because I still feel like his was a snapped type killing, but it's less likely, in my opinion, it's not less likely for a woman to snap, but it's less likely for a woman to successfully snap, just based on the fact that a lot of women have physical disadvantages against men, just from the standpoint of, like, men are stronger, just without any sort of weapon.
Right.
And so when women snap, men can, like, push them back and say, don't do that. Right? If a man snaps, he can physically overtake a woman a lot of times. And so the difference here being, like, she went to great lengths to, if she was a battered wife and it had been in defense, I understand the concept of her being concerned and scared and everything, but I just don't see it being a situation where you chop them up and put them in the garbage disposal.
Yeah. Another thing, though, I'm going to hold on to this for a minute and just keep saying it. This is not the period. Okay, if he sexually assaulted her, it's fucking wrong. So if he sexually assaulted her, it's wrong. He should not have done that.
There's a way to handle that, though.
You get away from him. That's the first thing.
And call the police.
And like, if he even did that once, it's wrong. But when you are, like, looking at this from the perspective of this very, very small timeline, say it was October 1st when they met, and it's November 28th when she kills him. That is less than 58 days that they have been together. And she is so scared of him that she won't leave, and she marries him, but he's been sexually assaulting her the whole time.
I don't buy any of that.
I would buy it to a degree in certain situations that could all certainly happen, but it would be a very rare circumstance that happens to a person who then is able to stab him, beat him to death, kill him, dismember the body, cook his head, boil his hands to remove the fingerprint, mix up the body parts with leftover
all
meat.
Of that together is what I don't buy. That's
what I'm saying. Like, all of that together is too much. So she ends up convicted of second-degree murder, which I think is bullshit. January 12th, 1993, she's convicted of second-degree murder. I think it's first-degree, but whatever. They bought second-degree. It felt like a compromise verdict. They gave her 27 years to life in prison as of 1992. Interestingly, she became eligible for parole in 2006, but she's been found to be unpredictable and a serious threat to public safety based on her behavior in prison. So that's in 2006. That's basically 14 years after the murder, 15 years after the murder. She became eligible again for parole in 2011, but she was denied parole again. And they cited that at this point in time, they didn't feel like she would be a productive citizen if she were freed, and that she had not taken responsibility for the murder. So she won't be eligible to seek parole again until 2026. That's so interesting to me.
It's really sad.
But this is one of those cases where I can't. So it's a Thanksgiving case. I can't separate what is the bullshit legend and what is the truth. I don't know if she actually ate her husband, because that takes it. First of all, that sells headlines and copies of stupid magazines and newspapers back in the early 90s. So you won't necessarily be able to ferret out the truth of this story because of the age of it. It kind of looks like she's a cannibal. The trial featured elements of bondage-related sex, decapitation, castration, and then they threw in the cannibalism. So when you've got all those sensational things going on, it's like she's a monster. So she ends up in all these shows like Happily Never After and Deadly Woman and Model Killers and Snapped. But whether, if she's accurately depicted in any one of those stories, it's not second-degree murder, but also they should never let her out.
Yeah, I think that would, I think she's going to have a really hard time getting out. Again, not because she killed someone that was attacking her, but because she went to such lengths to
cover it up.
Cover it up or mutilate him. I feel like that could have been like a couple of prongs there. I think.
Yeah, I would agree with that. Yeah.
For some reasons, bodies are hard. Full-size bodies are hard to hide, so you cut them up to put them away, right?
Yeah.
Or somewhat satisfying.
It's something.
I don't know. Yeah, it's pretty gross.
But if you look her up, her name is spelled Omaima, and her last name is Nelson. If you look her up, there's lots of video to watch about sort of what went on here and to come to your own conclusions. Because if she really was a victim multiple times, she could be suffering from some kind of like cluster disorder or some kind of, one of the disorders that people can get that looks very similar to this. Is related to having a complex PTSD, and that can send people into a state of psychosis. But I don't know if I believe all the sensationalism related to it. But it's bad.
I would say there's probably some things blown out of proportion there.
Yeah, so if it's as extreme as they make it sound in the sensationalism, she definitely should not get out of prison. If it's less than that, then some effort should be made to determine like what she really did.
Yeah, I will leave it in the hopefully capable hands of the parole commission.
Yeah, they seem to have a good grasp on it. I mean, they're going to see her again in 2025. Maybe they'll decide she's old enough she can't really kill the next guy.
That's a long period of time. They made her wait.
Sit there and wait.
Well,
yeah,
because there was 5 years between the first and the second petition to be paroled, but then there's 15 years.
Yeah, it's California, so I've never looked at how that type of eligibility works. But so, yeah, she's basically 15 years from the crime to her first parole hearing, 5 years till the second hearing. Although they went ahead and gave her the two big blocks. One, the first parole hearing saying she's an ongoing danger to society. Like, that means you're pretty much not going to get out even at future hearings. And then the second parole hearing, for some reason, she gets 5 years later. They say that she's not taken responsibility for the crime that she's convicted of. So that's the second big thing that can happen. So, yeah, I guess at that point they were like, we're going to let her cool her heels for a long time. That's a long, long time.
So, I wonder why they're saying she hasn't taken responsibility for it.
Well, that can be based on legal factors, like the way that appeals are filed. Like if you're filing something for actual innocence, or if you're saying you did it, but you had a reason that the court didn't find.
You have to, she would be accepting like guilt by saying she was a battered spouse to an extent. So guilt for the action of his death, but like, not necessarily what level of crime she's committing, right? You can't very well have a defense of, self-defense without admitting you did something. And so that's just confusing to me because it seems like, well, maybe they're saying because she's still saying it was self-defense that she's not taking responsibility for it.
Well, so here's what happens when she appears before parole commissioners in 2011, that's the more interesting one to me. And ABC News covered this because it is a very interesting case. The videos are down, but you can still read some of the text if you go to about October 5th, 2011. This is from the ABC News website. It says a California woman has been denied parole from a 25 years to life prison term she's been serving for killing her husband and then cooking and eating some of his remains. She's a former nanny and model whom prosecutors compared to the fictional cannibal Hannibal Lecter. She was convicted in 1993. A psychiatrist testified she was probably psychotic at the time of her killing. Nelson, who is a native of Egypt, and she was 23 at the time of the murder, will not again be eligible for parole for 15 years or until 2026, according to prosecutor Randy Pawlowski, who was the prosecutor of her parole hearing. She was not represented by an attorney as she appeared before parole commissioners she's at Chowchilla. She's at the Central California Women's Facility at Chowchilla. She was denied parole partly because, according to Pawlowski, she shows no remorse, takes no responsibility for her actions, and in other ways still blames the victim.
Okay.
Over Thanksgiving weekend in 1991, prosecutors said Nelson pulled out a pair of scissors. She stabbed her husband in their apartment. She cut off her husband's head, and she cut off his genitalia. According to the DA's office, Nelson cooked her husband's hands in oil, boiled the head, and placed it in the freezer. She later used a garbage disposal to get rid of the parts. Nelson claimed she was acting in self-defense because her husband sexually assaulted her. Prosecutors claimed that they believe she was probably planning to rob him. They said that she enlisted the help of two ex-boyfriends to remove her husband's teeth so the remains could not be identified. And they explain again that she had taken great steps to remove his fingerprints. And the district attorney's office said Nelson failed to complete any educational or vocational classes while incarcerated and has failed repeatedly to abide by prison rules. So the gist of this is she's just in prison bouncing around her cage like, it's something wrong with her. Weirdly enough, while I understand the prosecution's position on this, and I understand the parole board basically having denied this, I would point out that some of the things they're describing could also be psychosis secondary to complex post-traumatic stress, which you would have to have other doctors to do that. That's not going to be something I can even really tell you about because it manifests in so many different weird and complicated ways. But that could be what they're seeing in this woman.
Sure. And so that would mean she's not getting the help she needs. But as far as like any sort of appeal to her sentence or whatever, it'd be kind of moot at this point because she's literally up for probation or parole, whatever it is, when they allow her to.
Yeah, I mean, so the next round, the way this works is because of her credit for time served, when she actually goes in there for the very next hearing, which is in 2026, depending on the month of the year, I guess, she will have served 34 years of her 25 to life sentence. It's much more likely that she could get parole, but basically, like, she needs a lawyer to go in there and tell her, look, you got to complete some vocational programs. Even now, you've got another 5 years. Go ahead and get a college degree, do something while you're in here that indicates that you are trying to rehabilitate yourself.
Right, and not the time for any sort of defense.
Yeah, no, don't defend yourself. Don't say that it's his fault. That guy's been dead for 34 years now, or by the time she gets back in there.
Right, yeah. So hopefully they can, assess the situation and make a good call on it. Unfortunately, a lot of time, and it's unfortunate, not necessarily wrong. She could be perfectly capable of being out on the streets again, and she's not going to be because of the history. And as unfortunate as it is, she did that to somebody. So
yeah,
I would find it very difficult to sit in that kind of place, which is why there's a board that does it. I mean, it's not just, the one person or whatever that makes the decision. But yeah, that's not a great Thanksgiving.
No, it's not. And I thought for sure that was going to be like the worst thing I heard related to a Thanksgiving massacre in the more recent years. But then you sent me these other links, and I was like, oh my god. So that case taking place in 1991 in California and sort of unfolding after, we now move to 2009. And we moved to Florida, to the Fort Lauderdale area. Specifically, this is going to be technically Jupiter, Florida. This was bizarre to me. I had never heard of this before. Had you ever heard of this before?
I had actually. I believe I maybe watched something, and then I had to rewatch it because I was confused about an element of it. But I don't want to spoil. I don't want to like give it away now. But I'll tell you what it is when we get to it.
The second case that you picked out for me related to Thanksgiving is the case of Paul Michael Marriage. It takes place in Jupiter, Florida. This is crazy. It took me a minute to understand exactly how many people had died here, but this is a Thanksgiving Day, literally a Thanksgiving Day rampage. So when I looked at this case, I had to sort of like parse back through, but the gist of it is there are 4 victims here. And the first 2 victims are Paul Merhedge's twin sisters, Lisa Knight and Carla Merhedge, and then their aunt, who was 76 years old, and that's Ramondi Joseph, and their cousin's daughter, Michaela Sitton, who was 6 years old. This is the craziest story I think I've ever read. And I found what I think is like the right article to sort of encompass what happened here. On December 2nd, 2009, this is posted on CBSNews.com. Paul Michael Marriage sat through 3 hours of Thanksgiving Day dinner and sing-alongs around the piano, plotting the moment he would fatally shoot 4 relatives, his cousin-in-law said Tuesday. After opening fire, Paul was heard saying he had waited 20 years to kill them, according to the host of the dinner that turned deadly. There were no arguments, no warnings, no red flags before the rampage, said Jim Sitton, whose 6-year-old daughter was killed. Paul shot his 79-year-old aunt to death and killed his twin sisters, one of whom was pregnant. He had this whole thing pre-planned. His goal was to shoot his sisters and punish his parents, said Sitton. It's not clear exactly who was shot when, but the bloodbath could have been much worse, with 16 family members present and witnessing the events. Sitton said that Marriage, 35, also pointed the gun at his uncle, but it twice jammed and would not fire. At one point, according to Sitton, Paul turned and started to walk away and said, "I've been waiting 20 years to do this." Authorities are still searching for Marriage, who hasn't been seen since the shootings. At Sitton's home in an upscale gated community in Jupiter, a beach town some 55 miles north of Miami, crime scene tape still overshadows holiday decorations. Sitton said the holiday meal was a happy one. His daughter, Michaela, wrote on cards how thankful she was for her family and strung them on a clothesline. After dinner, she sang songs as part of an impromptu dress rehearsal for a performance of the Nutcracker she was to be in the next day. Sitton, a videographer for a local television station, said he doesn't know who invited Paul to his home, but he thought little of it when Paul's father called to say that he was on his way and needed directions. Sitton said his wife's cousin was always on the fringe of family life and rarely attended gatherings. He had only met him twice and hadn't seen him in more than a decade. Sitton said that Paul methodically picked off his victims, shooting his twin sisters, Carla, a real estate agent, and Lisa, who was pregnant. Like Michaela, they all loved to sing. Paul also shot his aunt. His brother-in-law, Patrick Knight, was in critical but stable condition at a hospital on Tuesday, and another man named Clifford Gabbaro was grazed by a bullet. Sitton didn't think that Paul planned to kill Michaela, but thinks he became jealous when he saw the family delighting in her singing. He tried to snuff out her light. He came into a baby's room, saw her innocence, he walked in, and he purposefully killed her.
That's the part of the story that whenever I initially saw it, I didn't understand it because that's brutal. It was brutal. This was after, it was like an afterthought. And he went like, so she didn't just get hit by gunfire, right? He went in to her room where she was sleeping and he killed her. This is a 6-year-old child of like his cousin. it's particularly vicious.
Yeah.
Don't you
it's
think?
particularly vicious.
So I had to go back through the case because I was trying to figure out of all the people there. I understand the sisters more so than not, as far as that would be like a direct family relationship, right? And like the brother or the cousin-in-law said he wanted to punish his parents. So my guess is he was some sort of like outcast. Somehow he felt slighted. And I have a feeling that probably nobody else in the family was aware of how he felt. And they probably were not aware that they had done that to him. Like this guy said, I didn't even think twice about him coming whenever they called and said he needed directions. He was part of the family, and as far as they could tell, it was his choice to be on the outskirts of the family for all those years.
This whole case is this bonkers, and this gets covered a lot on podcasts. It's a very popular and shocking case. I was looking for something here because, have you ever looked at the legal side of this?
I don't know, actually.
Okay, so there's a bunch of weird. So what I just read is sort of that's what happened. What you explained afterwards, that's the rest of it. It took them a really long time for this case to go to trial, and I was wondering, that was the reason I was so interested in sort of running with this one. Here's how the weirdness goes down. January 18th of 2011, they set a trial date for him. He had been charged with killing 4 family members, so he's got 4 counts of murder. They're wanting to go after the death penalty. So that's 2011. It's a year. It's getting into the second year after. But they set the trial date for August 8th of 2011. There was a new judge presiding over Tuesday's hearing because the circuit judge, Joseph Marks, was not currently certified to preside over a death penalty case. However, he planned to attend a training class in May, which would enable him to preside over the case when it goes to trial in August. But Karen Miller was the circuit judge who was there that day, who she is certified, so she could hear any of the issues until the other guy gets certified. And they thought that trial would last up to 5 weeks. I just thought that was fascinating. Had you heard of that?
No. Has he gone to trial?
Well, that was the other thing that was the reason I was asking you about it, is because I was like,
I think he's still awaiting trial, but I am not entirely certain.
Several of the articles I read said that he was still awaiting trial. That doesn't turn out to be the case. And that was the reason I mentioned podcasts were covering it, because according to Forensic Tales, and they put an update up there. So this goes to Forensic Tales. And I'm just using one little line from their I can't verify it anywhere so far, but I didn't look super hard. I'm using one line from their page at forensictales.com, and that is, he accepted a plea deal and he was sentenced to 7 consecutive life sentences for the murders.
Right.
And he's officially known as the Thanksgiving Day Killer.
That seems about right. It seems like I think, now you said that it's talked about a lot. I don't know that it is. I know that
it was talked about a lot.
It was talked about. Okay, because it is a truly terrible, terrible, terrible crime. It is born from the mind of I feel like a lot of the anger and other things that led up to this massacre were mostly in his head. And it's a shame because
what do you mean when you say mostly in his head? What you mean his perceived persecution complex?
Right. Well, I feel like when there's a grown man who's saying, my family rejects me, they love my sisters more than they love me. Okay, well, you've got a cousin-in-law saying that you're on the outskirts of the family by your own choice. And I've seen it. I've seen it happen where you're slighted, a person is slighted, and they have such hostility towards their family. And if you were to go to the family and say, like, what's the deal? They'd say, well, that's his choice. Like, we don't make him not come around. It's his decision to not come around. It's a really strange thing that I don't even know why I've become recently keenly aware of it. When you've got a situation where you've got the outcast, like this guy, right? He had like this personal vendetta against certain family members, and then he was just really terrible and killed the 6-year-old, right? But if you were to ask, like, the family probably didn't see that coming. They just thought he was like a weirdo who liked to stay to himself, which is what I mean by like this perceived. But I'm not saying, but once you become the person who doesn't come around, then people do tend to treat you like you're the person who doesn't come around.
Okay, so I'm not going to disagree with you on this because I like this topic, but I wonder if I might respectfully see if I could sway your opinion.
No, yeah, that's fine. I'm actually not really set in this. Like,
Okay, so on February 19, 2014 in the Sun Sentinel, a reporter there named Brett Clarkson, he reported on some of the behind the scenes going on in this case. And this article from the Sun Sentinel says, the killer's parents not liable for son shooting rampage, appeals court rules. So brief background, and then I'll read. Oh, actually, let me read some of the article and then we can discuss. So an appeals court has ruled that the parents of a mentally troubled South Florida man should not be held liable for inviting their son to Thanksgiving dinner, during which he shot 4 relatives dead, including a 6-year-old girl. In a decision released Wednesday, a state 4th District Court of Appeal judge upheld a lower court's ruling saying that the parents of Paul Marriage weren't legally responsible for the actions of their adult son, who was 35 at the time of the November 26, 2009 massacre. A holding that the Marriages owed a legal duty to the members of their family and extended family in this case would discourage families from providing a haven to troubled relatives for fear of civil liability, wrote Judge Robert Gross in the ruling. An attorney for the Jupiter couple whose 6-year-old daughter, Michaela, was killed, said she and her clients were very disappointed by Wednesday's decision. Julie H. Litke-Rubin, the West Palm Beach attorney who represents Muriel and Jimmy Sitton, said it wasn't fair to the Sittons that they weren't warned in advance by Paul Marriage's parents, Michael and Carol Marriage, that the Marriages had invited Paul to dinner for Thanksgiving, which the Sittons hosted at their Jupiter home. Muriel is a first cousin of Paul Marriage. At the time, Marriage was living in Miami. Litke said it was well established that the Sittons and other relatives feared Marriage. According to the decision, Marriage had previously been involuntarily committed under 3 different times under the Florida Mental Health Act, commonly known as being Baker-acted. He had also shown violent tendencies throughout his life. The Sittons and other relatives were surprised when they heard that he was attending dinner. The meal went fine, but then Marriage left to get something from his car, returning with a gun. Killed in the rampage were Marriage's sisters, which you've already discussed, and then Muriel Sitton's mother, who is Marriage's aunt, and little Michaela. My clients are still grieving the devastating loss of their daughter, Michaela, but they continue to live their lives, said Litke-Rubin Wednesday. Marriage was ultimately sentenced to 7 life sentences, and representatives of the victims' estates followed up with separate civil lawsuits alleging negligence against Paul's parents, Michael and Carol Marriage, for inviting them to the meal despite other relatives' fears and concerns. The suit was dismissed by a circuit court. Writing in the appeal court decision, Gross said that declaring the parents legally responsible for their son's horrific conduct would set a troubling precedent that would only serve to alienate mentally ill people from their families in the future. Efforts to reach attorneys for the Marriages were unsuccessful, and a call to the law firm this past Wednesday was not returned. So, what do you think of that?
Well, I was wondering, I don't feel like the parents could have had any idea that he was going to kill all those people. It's an interesting, I do understand why you would want to blame somebody, having lost your 6-year-old child.
Right, yeah.
It is quite interesting, though, that perhaps they should consider that the parents also lost 2 children and a forthcoming grandchild.
Yeah.
So I still feel like, mental issues, some of them are genetic, but they also come from places and come from, experiences, triggers, reactions. He was clearly, he clearly had a lot of issues. And for whatever reason, he was really focused on his sisters, his aunt, and then as an afterthought, the small cousin. Just the four of them were killed, right?
Yeah, that's just, there was a graze and another wounded person. So one person got grazed, another person was wounded, but there were only 4 deaths.
Okay, but we've got to be missing somebody because there's 7 life sentences.
The unborn child.
Okay. So,
I mean, that's what I think. Do you think that's right?
I don't know. I didn't know if we had missed somebody. I get where that lawsuit's coming from. It doesn't change the fact that I feel like a lot of his issues that he decided to take to address that particular way, I feel like they were probably not for good reason in reality. I cannot imagine a 37-year-old man, which, let's see, he wouldn't have been 37 at the time. He was 35, I guess. So what kind of 35-year-old kills 4 female members of their family?
Oh, if he's been Baker acted 3 times, so Baker acting is a little easier than it is in some places.
Is there any sort of diagnosis with those that you saw?
Well, okay, so no, I didn't see that, and they obviously sentenced him to a life sentence, so I don't believe that whatever they saw related to Paul marriage is going to be something like, I think his attorneys would have seized on that to get him out of, how do you put it? Like, he was Baker acted for being a danger to others. So I didn't see a diagnosis, but that's not what a Baker Act is for. A Baker Act is to determine if you're going to kill yourself or kill someone else.
Well, so there were plenty of opportunities for somebody to decide that he was going
I don't disagree with that. The Palm Beach Post reported in 2011 that some of the things that were going on with the Baker Act showed in the medical documents that they showed that he was basically just mentally chaotic. It said that when he was 24 years old, he still sucked his thumb, although he wrapped it in cellophane before sticking it in his mouth.
Dude, I just can't even.
He would sometimes wear 2 pairs of underpants, afraid that he might somehow accidentally impregnate a woman otherwise. He would at times take 5-hour showers, and he would frequently... He was either threatening to or actually attempting to commit suicide. And then there was this whole thing about blood. He said that he saw blood everywhere. The medical records were released in 2011 by the prosecutors because Marriage was accepting life in prison to avoid a possible death sentence for killing a total of 4 relatives and injuring 3 others, although there is also a fetus in here. I don't think people at the time realized that that's part of what's being represented. But they showed pretty disturbing details because these take place over 11 years. This is doctors and hospital visits that the Marriage's family, they've been seeking treatment for him in multiple places for 11 years. Think about that for a second. That's a lot.
It is.
To your point, to your question.
Everybody has one of these people.
Well, to your question, a report from 1996 when Marriage was in his early 20s showed that as a young man, his life had already been ruined by depression and obsessive-compulsive rituals so severe that he gave up plans for law school, and it was determined that he could not function on his own. The amount of soap, water, bars, and paper towels used was sad. This is him writing of his own condition. He had been under his own house arrest for 2.5 years. Now, I don't know if that's a real house arrest or if that's something that he has sentenced himself to. But his parents had arranged for him to move into an apartment away from the family, and that made him madder for some reason. He deeply resented the fact that Marriage couldn't live with his family. He told a therapist in 1998 that he felt that his family was obligated to take care of him, thought he should be able to move home, and he firmly believed that his family should just suffer with him because they did it, whatever that means. His father had been diagnosed with prostate cancer, and that sparked many obsessions and delusions. His research into his father's illness, specifically a passage he said he read in a book about the human brain controlling actions, caused him to lose all sense of spirituality. He said that I sat watching my father sleep and waited till he woke up to tell him that there was nothing to hope for anymore. Then, in April of 1999, he tried to kill himself with a gunshot wound to the chest that lacerated one of his lungs. That attempt came after the first of 2 times that his family had him involuntarily confined under the state's Baker Act. Afterwards, Michael Mirage visited local gun shops and begged them to not sell guns to his son. Again in 2005, he tried suicide, swallowing all the pills that were left in his extensive cache of psychotropic medicines. In family therapy sessions, Marriage's twin sisters, Carla and Lisa, said that they got along with their brother before his first severe bout of depression when he was around 19, but the relationship deteriorated. And in 2006, Carla, Marriage, won a restraining order against them after he lunged at her and threatened to slit her throat, one of several violent incidents reported between Marriage and other relatives. He described their relations this way: I was the center of attention and my sisters kept getting jealous.
Didn't she withdraw that though?
No, she won the restraining order. She later it was later expired or dropped, but she did get the temporary and she got a permanent restraining order. I don't know what happened after that.
I don't know for certain. I thought she had perhaps gotten a temporary one. She then withdrew the request, but I don't know. But it was for threatening to kill her.
Yes, and for lunging at her.
So, okay, what you just said, as far as he was the center of attention and his sisters were jealous of him.
That's what he says, yes.
Okay, well, that's what I mean when I say that, like, a lot of what's happening here, at least in his head, it's not really occurring. There's no question this guy is troubled, right?
No, there's no question at all.
But, to the extent that he acts out like this, like, there's no excuse for this behavior. I don't care how OCD you are. It's not, and it doesn't even, from what I see, it doesn't even come up. Like, they don't even try to have him be insane. He ultimately takes a plea. So
they don't get that far in the process, if that makes
and yet so many years go by. It's crazy, isn't it?
Well, yeah. I mean, there's lots of interesting material. If people are super interested in this case, it was covered once upon a time. It just really missed being a great podcasting tale, and that's not to say that like people haven't covered this case, but I'm saying it because I think it would have made a great single season of a whole podcast where you go back and you like sort of cover. Like, there's interviews of him online. There's him talking to the media. There's him in phone calls from jail. And I think covering his story and sort of how he ended up, I think this is probably, I'm going to say this because I think this is how you would view this story. And if I'm wrong, just say I'm wrong. You really like to know why people do crazy shit. And you don't like to know from the perspective of like a legal definition or like a doctor's definition. You really want to know, like, what was the trigger? Like, what thing caused that to happen? Is that pretty accurate?
I mean, yeah, that's not a false statement. I actually, I feel like I sort of do know why. But yeah, I'd like that to be confirmed or denied. Sure.
I think this would be a great study, this particular case. I think if you were to take a look at why his parents think what happened, why his other relatives who survived think what happened, and the things that his sisters had said on the record related to the restraining orders, family therapy, and other incidents, and then to look at what Paul thinks, why what happened, I think that would be fascinating because you would have it from like 3 or 4 perspectives, and you could probably get into like. So part of this, I think he's a loser.
And there's no question that he's a loser.
But part of this, I think, he didn't have any control over. And I think
Yeah, I don't know about that.
You think he would just give up law school to give up law school?
I'm not saying that he didn't believe that he didn't have control of it. I'm just saying there's a huge difference in a lot of pathways and things that happen and decisions that are made and reactions that occur between like being a college student that's headed to law school and being a college student who had to give up law school because of their multiple, issues. It's a huge spectrum there. Wouldn't you agree?
Oh yeah, I would agree. But I guess this is how I look at it. I think I'm going to lean with you one way and say, yeah, he probably made some choices here. And part of this is probably under his control, whether he realizes or not. But here's where it gets like weird for me. So agreeing with you on that, to just give up law school because you want to move back in with your parents, regardless of the trigger and regardless of the cause for it, there's something wrong with you.
I agree. I would say there's no question that there's something wrong.
And they didn't want him to come home.
Well, and that should give you more information about the situation. I'm just saying this isn't anybody's fault here.
No, not at all.
But, everybody in life, we're all human beings and we all have experiences, and those experiences, they affect how the humans we become, right? They affect how we grow as people, what we turn into. And every once in a while, there are people who just never get it. Now, is it a mental disorder? Is it, just a selfish kid that never grew up? What all contributed to that happening here? I have no idea. But there's no question that a lot of things happened here. And to be in a situation where you have waited 20 years to massacre, I'm surprised he didn't kill more people, honestly. And the fact that it was sort of targeted and random, I don't understand why he killed that little girl. That really bothered me.
That's not random. I don't think it's random at all. That's just jealousy because a lot of projection occurs in this case. He's telling you what he thinks.
Well, when I say random, I mean like the sisters make sense. The aunt, he wanted to hurt his parents, so I guess so. But he didn't even know the 6-year-old girl.
That's what I'm saying. He was jealous of her. So when he says, it's projection when he says, I was the center of attention and my sisters were jealous of that. It's projection because the truth is he is jealous of his sisters and that is the way that he's telling you. So it applies to the little girl as well.
What does that tell you about this 35-year-old man? It's weird, right? It's weird.
I think it would tell me that he's incredibly immature and possibly developmentally disabled.
That is what the developmentally disabled part of it is what I would consider when you think of, because no 35-year-old person is going to be jealous of a 6-year-old kid.
They shouldn't be. No,
it's a really weird situation if that happens. And so, okay, but then, so that's what I initially think is like, oh, he didn't have like the cognitive development that he, like a normal, 30-something would have, where they say, yeah, like who would be jealous of a 6-year-old kid? But then you go back to, he was a college graduate who was going to go to law school. He can't possibly be that developmentally disabled.
Well, yeah, I see what you're saying, but I could probably make the argument that if you're dealing with someone who's gone through some kind of trauma and triggers are able to trip him back to that trauma, then I could argue he was both.
What was the trauma?
I don't know. I'm just saying, like, cases like this.
You think he could be developmentally disabled and what? You said he could be both?
He could be emotionally stunted, developmentally disabled, and able to go from college to law school. Because if you're telling me that, like, you don't know any lawyers that are developmentally disabled or emotionally stunted, I can show you like a sheath of them. Like there's lots of those that happen to make their way through. It's not that they're not intelligent. I'm not talking about their intellect. They are smart people, but emotionally, maturity, like they have different times in their lives. Some of them, their maturity is not stable. Like they're not always mature people.
But that wouldn't be like a developmental disability, would it? Or maybe it would. I don't know. I guess in my mind, the two things were mutually exclusive. Perhaps not. Now you said something about trauma, which I'm not aware. I haven't heard any trauma mentioned. I would say he definitely suffered something. I don't know what it was. I would assume it's something probably deeply embedded in his childhood, since they start talking about his depression when he was a teenager, it seems like. So you gotta watch kids on those types of trucks, because the problems they have, they start festering. Rather than sort of, sugarcoat everything, as parents, you have to give kids tools to deal with things, right? And I'm not saying it's his parents' fault at all, but I'm just saying there's a reason why he got really focused on this particular situation. And, what happened at Thanksgiving 20 years ago that has led to this.
That's why I'm saying, this case makes an interesting story.
But the problem is this story is a lot of people's life. And like, I just can't.
All of true crime are.
Right, but
I'm not going to do it on this podcast that is already sort of poking fun at true crime. I'm just saying, like, there are most of the big, major, amazing Oscar-winning movies that are relevant to crime are destroying parts of people's lives.
Right. Well, I'm just saying I don't mind speculating when I'm trying to solve a crime, but this crime is solved.
Oh, yeah. That's why we would never be the one doing a whole season of this.
Well, to the extent that, he's going to be in jail forever, and, he's going to be in jail. I didn't see anything about him being in any sort of mental health facility or anything like that.
No.
That's a whole interesting aspect to me, because I feel like there's no question that there's mental health issues with anybody that has a 3-hour dinner with people and then turns around and kills 4 of them, tries to kill more than 4 of them.
So his pleas are for all first degree murders out of Palm Beach County, and he is currently in Sumter Correctional, which is Sumter is so it's going to be a Region 3 facility. Mm-hmm. I was trying to see if they had a classification for that facility.
You mean as far as whether he's receiving the mental assistance that he might need?
Yeah, they don't. It's not available at that particular location. There's nothing about that location that's mental health related.
It blows my mind that that never comes. As long as the time between the incident occurred and when he finally pleaded guilty and accepted the 7 life sentences, it doesn't come up. Like, it's weird.
Yeah, no, it just sort of vanishes. That's why I was saying, like, some people have dug into it a little bit, but I don't think they're completely understanding the court documents that are available.
I imagine that his parents probably just put their hands up in the air and said,
oh, well,
I give up.
It looks like they've been defending themselves against other family members. And that is like the worst possible thing to be going on.
It ripped the family apart.
It's kind of ironic that it happened at Thanksgiving and then it spends the rest of these people's lives destroying their families when it happened at the time of year where people are supposed to be sort of together.
Right. And, they lost 2 of their children and they didn't want that to happen. But it seems like in a perfect world, which we certainly do not live in, he would need some therapy.
Yeah, I mean, there's some very basic programs here at the Sumter facility he's in, but it's not a strong enough facility for mental health that I would consider to be a place that he would get help if what I'm picturing is going on with him. Now, the other thing about him, though, at this point, he's gone through, if he's been in there for quite some time, which he has, he's gone through a number of different ways that they evaluate you. So it could be that it's bullshit and he's just a asshole. They may have figured it out and called him out on it. And he was like, you know what? Yep. I was just jealous of my sisters and that's how I acted.
Gosh, that's really bad.
Yeah. Thank you for joining us. We are sponsored by LabRottiCreations.com. You can check them out at LabRottiCreations.com, and you can still use the code CRIMEXS for a fun pop pet portrait of your own pet. You can also reach us on Twitter, Instagram at TrueCrimeXS, or you can give us a call if you know anything about any of the cases that we're talking about at 252-365-5593. You can also reach us at Gmail at truecrimexs@gmail.com, and you can check out our website at www.truecrimexs.com. We'll see you next time.